Hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest edition of our Educating and Empowering You program. I am Sarah Clute-Bain. I'm the Boone County Hospital Foundation Director. We sponsor this monthly event that helps bring education and information to our community. And with it being available via the web and being recorded, it can be viewed anywhere at any time. So I'm really grateful today to have Savannah Preul today to present with us a little bit more about just having peace of mind through the end of life process that can be, in the pre-planning phases. And I'll definitely hand that over to you in a moment, Savannah, to give us all your expertise and knowledge on that. And but I just as a general rule, I'd like to share really quickly what we have coming up the next couple of months for educating and empowering you. So in September, we're looking at, typically we have a Medicare enrollment program each year in that time frame. So we're looking at that. And then October, we typically have women's health and a women's health topic and presenters. So be watching for those to come out really soon. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Savannah, to share with us a little bit more about yourself and jump into your program today. Thank you for being here.
Yay! Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. I'm super excited to talk with you guys today a little bit about advanced funeral planning and the importance. Again, my name is Savannah Preul, and I am the pre-arrangement or pre-need specialist at the Schroeder-Reimers Memorial Chapel here in Boone. Before I kind of jump into my presentation here, I try to start off with a little bit of funeral trivia. I'm used to presenting in front of people, so virtual is a little different for me, so bear with me. And then I'll tell you a little bit about myself and we'll get started. So with that being said, let's start with my first trivia question. So in this case, I'll just go ahead and give you the answer rather than having anybody shout out. So starting with the first one, who holds the record for the world's most expensive funeral? You know, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, Ronald Reagan, John F. Kennedy. So in this case, the answer is Ronald Reagan. His funeral costs were estimated to be about $400 million. So those costs were so high because of the day of mourning declared that closed down stock market and gave federal workers the day off. So just some fun facts about the funeral world. Which celebrities' funeral tickets were scalped for more than $10,000? Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, Prince, John Lennon. The answer is Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson's funeral was actually held at the Staples Center, where the Los Angeles Lakers play. Over 17,000 people attended. It featured some pretty big time performances by Stevie Wonder and Mariah Carey and a few others. Who owns the plot next to Marilyn Monroe? Is it Joe DiMaggio, Madonna, Hugh Hefner, or John F. Kennedy? The answer is Hugh Hefner. So in 1992, he actually purchased the plot for, I believe it was roughly $75,000 next to Marilyn Monroe. Okay, so last trivia question for you. For a veteran's service, how many folds should be made for a properly folded flag? And so the answer is 13. So thank you for humoring me in my funeral trivia there. Okay, so this is my little family here. Not pictured are my two high energy mini Australian Shepherds. They're so much fun, but of course, not pictured, like I said. So on the left is my husband, Jesse, and my son, Brooks, in the middle. I really do need to update that photo because he is now 1 year old, so he's a little bit bigger now. But a little bit about myself. I grew up in Lakeview, Iowa. Graduated from East County High School there and actually furthered my education in the mortuary science program. So I actually started funeral business or working with the funeral home in, gosh, I believe it was like 2017 on the funeral director side of things. And I quickly realized that I really enjoyed working with families one-on-one. So when the opportunity presented itself to be on the advanced funeral planning side of things, I jumped on that. And so I've been doing that since 2019. And I absolutely love what I do, and I'm just happy to be here today. Okay, so how many of you carry a spare tire? Right? Most of us, for something we may or may not need, right? So why is it that many of us don't plan our funeral arrangements when we know it's something that we will absolutely need someday? I'm here to talk with you guys today about the importance through advanced funeral planning. So as you can see here, I've got some life-altering events. So in life, we all experience these life-altering events. These are events that are so significant that they change the way we view ourselves and the world around us. So some of us may have been affected by a graduation, a wedding, a job loss, all things that we all experience. And I want to focus today on how our death will be a life-altering event for the ones we love. And I also share how we can make how we can create a plan to make that a healthy transition. And I want to do that through the lens of a life-altering experience that I, my own self, personally lived through. So here is a photo of myself and my sweet dad at my wedding. On January 23rd of 2022, myself and my husband were driving home from a wedding in Kansas City when I received a life-changing phone call, right? So I had gotten the news that my father had unexpectedly passed away. I will never ever forget, the shock, the disbelief, that feeling that people talk about, just numbness, something that I will absolutely never forget. And I will always just, it's hard to talk about, but again, it's such an important thing that we go through in life. So that's why I'm here today. So I think it's human nature for us to share that news with the people that it's also going to impact. So, we're calling our, in my case, my grandparents in this situation. We're calling our loved ones. We're calling friends, reaching out, watching the support system just hone in, and they're wrapping their arms around you all while my sister and I are trying to make funeral plans, make decisions, all within such a short period of time. It was just my sister and myself in charge of making all of those arrangements. So once we finally mapped out some funeral plans, we were able to set the planning aside. Our grief truly started to set in for us. And at that time, it was so important for us to see our dad and spend time with him, even prior to the visitation, to really begin our grieving process. Because for us, seeing was truly believing. I had to see for myself that he was really gone. So once we were able to have that time together, then came the visitation itself. So we were able to have that the evening prior to the funeral, and we had the visitation at the funeral home itself. And, the amount of people that came, people that you either didn't know, you hadn't seen for such a long time. It was such an overwhelming feeling, but it was such a good feeling too, to know that you had such a great support system. I think that the visitation is such an important aspect in funeral service itself, just because it allows that time it allows you to have that safe space to have those hard conversations, so that you're not having, mini funerals at the grocery store. You're not having those conversations at the bank or at school. You're creating that, again, safe space to have those hard conversations when you're ready for it, because typically, you know, when you're at the store or at the bank, you're not ready to talk about a loved one that you had lost. So that is such an important piece to the whole experience. All of the conversations that you're having with those people as well, you know, they're reaching out. How can we help? Are there groceries we can get? Are there meals that we can bring you? Are there flowers? Such an important aspect, again, in the whole process. So once we had the visitation, we were able to have the service itself. The service was the next day at the church. I remember sitting in the pew, reflecting on how many lives our father had impacted, and then it makes you reflect on your own and how we would get through the days to come. Once we had the service itself, it was then time for the luncheon following the service. We had to go to a different facility in itself to accommodate the large group of people. And it was finally, you know, at that point where you're able to kind of take a deep breath, you know, between the fellowship, the meal, and in a sense, celebrating. You're not celebrating the fact that they're gone, but you're celebrating the life that they lived. So, with that being said, what I just walked you through was my own personal experience with the acute loss period, from hearing the news of the loss of my father through celebrating the life that he had lived. So we at Schroeder-Reimers Memorial Chapel walk our families through this process from the time of death through the onset of grief. I wanted to share with you my own personal experience, and of course, I kind of gave you the cliff notes because otherwise we'd probably be here all day. So I just gave you kind of bits and pieces of my experience, because now more than ever, I feel my job is so important. My dad had no advanced funeral plans. My sister and I were left to make that decision. Are we going to cremate him? Are we going to do traditional burial with casket? Where are services going to be held? Is there a cemetery plot? You know, where are we going to bury him? And then last but not least, how are we going to pay for this? So such an important aspect in the whole process that I went through my own self. So should I be buried or cremated? Now, when thinking about what is going to happen when we die, a lot of people think, well, I just need to figure out, well, or whether I'm going to be buried or cremated. You know, that decision is absolutely necessary. What we often forget is that, you know, your death doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to all of those who have ever loved you. So this means that, you know, the people most affected by these decisions will be your family as they begin to cope with a world that you're no longer a part of. And so what we focus on when we help you pre-plan is that what are the needs of the survivors and how can we tailor a plan to help them through this experience, you know, in the simplest way possible. So at the time of your death, your loved ones are faced with 75 to 125 different items, all within a short period of time. So if nothing has been addressed prior to your death, you place all of that on someone that you love and care about. And chances are that you're here today because you want to avoid having that happen. So pre-planning completes a majority of those decisions and tasks ahead of time. So now let's talk about some common reasons why people pre-arrange their funerals. Starting with urgent tasks and decisions that are handled ahead of time. So when a death occurs and there's been no advanced funeral plans made, it's not uncommon for our funeral directors to sit there and, you know, ask questions like, you know, what was mom or dad's social security number? What was mom or dad's parents' full names and where were they born? So that is all vital information that we have to have, our funeral directors have to have in order to fill out a death certificate. So we like to gather all that information ahead of time and of course from the source. Eliminates doubts. So this is also another big one. You know, there's no question whether or what final disposition is going to look like. Are we going to move forward with cremation? Are we moving forward with traditional burial with casket? Or are we going to incorporate both? Because that's an option too. And then peace of mind that it gives you your own self. You know, when I meet with families from start to finish, it's such a rewarding feeling to kind of see the weight of the world lifted off their shoulders once they've completed everything, and you essentially don't have to look at it again. Family can be with each other. So, you know, going back to a situation where there's been no advanced funeral plans made, it's not uncommon for our funeral directors to sit here at the funeral home for hours on end with families, when in reality, these families should be at home, surrounded by their support systems. And then, of course, costs can be addressed ahead of time, and I'll get into that more here in a second. So let's talk about the 5 key points to a funeral pre-need policy itself. So number 1, guarantees the cost. So we at Schroeder-Reimers Memorial Chapel guarantee our costs. So that means, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, if a death occurs, our prices remain the same. Funds are protected. So, for example, you know, you have to go into a care facility, a nursing home. You're there for an extended period of time. Nursing homes can be expensive. You run out of funds, and so Medicaid, Title 19 comes into picture. So we set up the funds in a way that they are protected. They can't be counted against you. They are solely used for your burial expenses. The policy is transferable, so your funds would be usable at any funeral home in the United States. Because that's a big one too. You know, a question I often get is, well, what if I decide to move? You know, I move into Florida, I move into Arizona. Those funds can go with you. We also offer the option to pay over time. So we can set up a multi-payment plan that works best, that would suit your needs. And then, of course, you have coverage while paying. So should you pass away prior to paying for it all, the remaining balance is covered through a built-in insurance component. So we work with a company called National Guardian Life. So that is the financial vehicle that we use to hang on to the funds until the time of one's passing. Okay, so we've spoken about the what of pre-planning, and we've spoken about the why of pre-planning, and now we'll touch on the how. So the way that we help you is we put together this plan is through what we call our final wishes organizer. So we created this organizer because as long as we've been serving families, we found that many come in unprepared, overwhelmed by all of the things that had to be taken care of. If completed properly, this organizer can contain roughly 95% of all of the items necessary to make one's arrangements. This organizer helps us walk through the necessary information that would be needed at the time of death. You know, from there, we will go through and outline what your wishes look like, what your services would be. We provide your family so that we don't, you know, so there's no guess. We also discuss different benefits like veteran benefits and out of area protection. So with out of area protection, just like we don't know when a death is going to occur, we also don't know where. So that is something we get into that essentially would bring you into our care in case a death would occur, you know, out of state, multiple states away, and make sure that you're not incurring any additional costs, because that can get expensive as well. So once we do that, we will show you the cost associated with what services. You know, most people want to know what the final cost will end up being, and how to plan for that. You know, we offer the ability to pay for the arrangements in advance, either all at once, over time, like we talked about. And we also, again, guarantee our costs like I talked about. And of course, all of this can be accomplished by sitting down and going through this final wishes organizer itself. So I have some frequently asked questions here. I try to, think about all the questions that people ask me and try to put them into kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Just a pool of multiple questions, because I can't fit them all on here, but we'll start with what I have here. So what does a funeral cost? So this is a great question. However, it varies, when talking about what each person's needs, wants, and wishes looks like, there really is no right answer. So again, that's why I like to sit with you one-on-one, figure out what it is your wishes are, what they look like, and then I'm able to kind of customize what that looks like price-wise for you. How long will our meeting last? So I typically tell people, if you choose to set up a time, that our meeting would typically last anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. So it just kind of depends, but I think that's a safe bet. And then how do I go about purchasing a cemetery plot? So I would be more than happy to get you into contact with whomever the sexton is of said cemetery. And then from there, you guys would then set up a time that would work best for you to go out and pick out a cemetery plot. And then how do I go about purchasing a headstone? So we've worked with numerous different headstone companies in the past. So I'm more than happy to try and direct you to which one that would best suit your needs, and kind of where, depending on location and where the cemetery is itself. And then another big one is it a good idea to put your funeral plans in your will? So a lot of times the will often doesn't get read until after the funeral itself. So that's why it's so important that you meet with a funeral provider, of your choice, of course. And once all of that vital information has been taken down, we then start a file, and that's kept safely here at the funeral home. And of course, family knows that you've made set arrangements too. So that's also a big one between the funeral home and your loved ones. So the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. It's not an easy conversation to have. However, it's something that unfortunately we all are going to have to deal with at some point in our life. But that's what I have for you.
Awesome, Savannah, thank you so much. This is such a difficult topic to talk about, and I think, again, it's just always so important, and especially our mission with the Educating and Empowering You programs, to get these conversations started, because we always joke about two things being certain in life, death and taxes. And so while it's not an easy conversation, it's an important conversation. And first of all, I'd like to just share with everybody, I'm going to ask a couple of questions of Savannah, but if anybody has a question, they want to put it in the chat, please go ahead and do that. And I know you have your information right there. It looks like that's email or just calling you. Either one of those is kind of the best way to reach you. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I really appreciated a couple of things, first comments, I guess, and then a couple of questions, but really appreciated the frequently asked questions they were very helpful, and just things that people really don't think about, like putting their funeral plans in their will, and having that be something that can be well after the actual services taking place. And then that organizer just seems like that's really helpful. I'm curious with that organizer, we talked a lot about costs and like whether somebody wants to be cremated. Is that Final Wishes organizer going to help with like selecting music, with selecting like all their wishes related to their services, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah. So, when I meet with families, a lot of times, or every time, I go through and gather all that vital information that's going to be needed for a death certificate, information that's going to be needed in the event we help write an obituary. Then we kind of go through and we talk about if there's any special songs, if you have any scripture, And then we can also talk about specifics, if we're thinking casket burial, what are we doing with any jewelry? Are there any clothing preferences? Are there flower preferences? Are we just thinking, seasonal floral arrangements? We talk about church affiliations. We talk about any cemetery plots that you own. Do you have a headstone there? There's just so many things. And so when I go through the Final Wishes organizer, I gather it all. We talk about merchandise. We look at caskets. We look at vaults. We look at urns. And then from there, I'm able to itemize everything out between our services and third-party vendors. So, for example, like the death certificates, we don't control those prices. So I explain what our prices look like versus third-party prices, and I'm able to give you, exact prices of what you could expect your funeral to look like today.
That's great. That's helpful. Was there anything else on that you wanted to add before I go to the next part?
I think I mean, essentially
Yeah.
that's everything for.
Yeah. Good. Well, and I think that it sounds like you had a very personal experience with having to go through all of this without any information. And so it really adds to what you do and how you're so passionate about really helping people through this process, because you know how it feels to be on the other end of it where there were no plans made and how challenging that can be, and hard. Like you said, you kind of had to go through the whole planning process and then grieve. And so really having that all taken care of really helps. So another question I thought of was just regarding costs, and it sounds like everything's very flexible and transferable to other places, other states, there, which I think that's really great as well. One of the things I was curious about was, for example, I believe certain employers might have like a funeral benefit to their staff. So if that were the case and they didn't have that money available to them until obviously they passed away, is there a way that you work with people on that regarding payment, or is there like other options that might be related to some kind of insurance program like that?
So I think with this, so it would probably be more of like a life insurance. Is that kind of what you're?
Well, yes. I mean, I know, I'm pretty sure the hospital has that. Like, so
Oh, sure.
we have a benefit as staff members that we receive money like for funeral costs should we pass away. So
Yeah.
it's something that we wouldn't have access to that money, or a family, I should say,
Until,
wouldn't have access to that money until the time of our death. But
right.
could we still come in and meet with you and work with you, even if there, or is there kind of a baseline kind of dollar amount that we have to be prepared for?
No, So I meet with anybody that wants to sit down, and I again take down all the information. And again, the biggest incentive is, if you decide to set aside the funds, is that we guarantee our prices. So if that's the case, and you have that out there, then it would just be subject to the prices of the time of your passing, if that makes does that make sense? So, whenever you would pass away, that money would absolutely be usable towards your funeral expenses, but it would just be subject to whatever prices are at that time.
Yeah, yeah, that
But
makes
no,
sense.
absolutely, I will meet. I'm here to help. I will meet with anybody. I'm just here to educate and do my best, anyways.
Yeah. So if I were to sit down and meet with you, Savannah, would I be able to automatically get one of those organizers just from meeting with you?
Yep.
And kind of
Yep.
how does that work? Does that stay with you in our conversation, or do I get to take it home and fill it out and think about it? How does that work?
Yeah, so typically what I do is I will sit there and I will actually take down all the information. Um, and we'll talk through it, and we can do it as many times as you need. So we can meet more than once. We don't have to tackle it all in one day. So again, I'll go through, ask those questions, that vital information. We'll talk through services, and maybe some people don't know what they want. So I'm just there to provide information about what they want. And then, yeah, I absolutely print off and give you, flyers if there's a veteran, or like I mentioned, that out of area protection, and all that information there. If we're looking for any cemetery property information, I can contact whomever or give you the phone number. So yeah, I'm just kind of here to try to provide all the help I can.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that just sounds so helpful and necessary. So again, you have your information here up on the screen to contact you directly. They could even probably call Schroeder-Reimers Memorial Chapel directly as well, get a hold of you. Willing to meet with people in Boone County. Do you meet with people outside of Boone County, since there are other locations as well?
Yep, I sure do. I
Okay,
can
so
make just about
anywhere like in Iowa, or is there any kind of
Oh,
like
well,
limit
typically,
to?
Boone Story County,
Okay,
is kind of the area that, just, yeah, kind of around this area.
okay. Boone and
That's
Surrey.
also in Story City or Ames.
Yep, that helps. That helps to kind of narrow that down too, or expand if someone was thinking, gosh, well, I live in Story County and they
Mhm.
still have that service available to them as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I think that was all my questions. I wrote down a bunch of notes, and I certainly can appreciate all that you talked about and the key points and all the decisions that people have to make in such a short amount of time. In dealing with that acute loss period that you mentioned as well. It was a really well put together program. We're so grateful to have you here to talk to us about this difficult topic, Savannah. So if there's not anybody that has any other questions, I don't see anything in the chat. We can conclude for today, and just know that we will put this out as a recording so everybody can feel free to share with family members as they wish.
Awesome.
Well,
Well, again, thank you, Sarah, for having me today.
thank you so much, Savannah. Take care.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.